What up, guys? The Bench Buddies are back with my college basketball week 14 top 25. And let's get into it. Dropping from my rankings, Oregon and Mississippi State, both with some very bad weeks this week. And that's why they're falling out of my rankings, but they do stay in my others receiving votes. And Maryland just misses the cut. They're my 26th best team in the country right now. Creighton is on a good winning streak right now. After a rocky start to the season, they're really finding their way. And same with Texas. Even though they are kind of floating around the middle of the pack in the SEC right now. I think they could be a dangerous team to watch out for as we enter February. 25 through 21, Michigan jumps back into the rankings with two close victories, and it's because teams just keep on losing that are towards this back end of the 25. And with that being said, that's Wisconsin and Louisville and Illinois and Ole Miss. All these teams lost at least once last week, some worse than others. Wisconsin especially gets a loss on the road, close win against Northwestern, who's not that good. Louisville beats Wake Forest, bad loss on the road to Georgia Tech, so they're falling back as well. And then Ole Miss stays put, good win at against Texas, lost against Auburn by 10. Just couldn't really figure that one out, so they stay at 23. Illinois stays at 22. Looked awful in the first half against Ohio State. Thought they were going to lose that one, but they came roaring back. I think went on a 16-0 run in like a 6-minute span late in the second half to win that game against Ohio State. Obviously lost in overtime to Nebraska. So this Illinois team really needs to find their footing. They're 7-5 in the Big Ten and really need to break free from the middle of the pack. Michigan is doing so, breaking free from the middle of the pack. Looks like it's going to be a three-horse race between Purdue, Michigan State, and Michigan at this point. Maybe Wisconsin could be in there if they start to figure it out, and maybe Maryland as well. But it's a big week for Michigan. I think if they can win against Oregon, go on the road, beat Indiana, go 10-2 after this week in conference play, more than likely they will probably end up being a top four seed in the Big Ten tournament. 16 through 20. And this is where it gets interesting. Texas Tech just missed my cut last week. And what did they do this week? A huge, huge week. Beating TCU, obviously, by 14 wasn't really much of a contest there, but beating Houston on the road in OT gives them just, I think, an advantage over some of these teams at this point in the season. Texas Tech's playing really good basketball in the Big 12, and I think they can be the surprise team in the Big 12 to possibly win the regular season championship. 8-2. Baylor at Arizona, two tough teams that are playing some good basketball right now. So it's a big week for Texas Tech as well. And a big week for UConn last week. You know, they beat DePaul, should have beat them, but going on the road to beat Marquette, I think that was a must-win game for them at this point in the season. Not the same UConn team we've seen the last 2 years, but they're finding ways to win these big games. Now, if they can do the same thing against a red-hot St. John's team, UConn might be back heading into the end of the regular season. Missouri, Memphis, Clemson, they all move up because they all won last week. And talk about tough week. Look at Missouri. Played a ranked Mississippi State on the road, destroyed them. Go on the road to face Tennessee early in the week, and then you get Texas A&M at home. So big week for Missouri, and if they want to vault to the top of the SEC standings, you got to win these two games this week. Memphis taking care of business yet again, and Clemson, I think they can give Duke a run for their money. We're going to really see it this weekend. They play Duke at home Saturday, so make sure you tune into that game to see what this Clemson team is really made of. 11 through 15, I think you can probably put any of these teams in any of these spots. You know, St. Mary's isn't getting enough love, but I think they will now that they beat Gonzaga. So they move up to 15 in my rankings. Now they go on the road to face San Francisco and Oregon State. They're 10-0 in the West Coast Conference, and I think they're going to get to 12-0. St. Mary's just looks like they're on a great run right now. They are probably going to lose one or two games in this conference. They do almost every year. Most of the time it's to Gonzaga, but I think they got the upper hand this year, already beating them at home. Kansas falls to Baylor after they were up 21 and just a total collapse. Probably one of the worst Kansas losses that I've seen in my lifetime. And I don't know where they go from here. If they win at Iowa State, it was probably just a fluke thing. But if they don't show up in that game, I have big concerns moving forward. Kentucky, I think they're just in the middle of that SEC play right now. 4-4, beat Tennessee on the road, and then Coach Calipari returns home, and then you lose by 10. And it was close there, but they just pulled away late. And I think Kentucky has a lot to figure out still, even with this point into the season. And Ole Miss on the road, that's a tough game for them. Don't be surprised if Ole Miss can pull off that upset. Then St. John's, welcome to Big East play, and you get the two best teams in the Big East that aren't you, Marquette and UConn. And if they can go 1-1 this week, I think that's a huge win for them. Now, if they go 2-0, probably top 10, maybe even top 5 in the country at this point. And if they go 0-2, I think they might be falling back to the 25 area in my rankings here. So it's a big week for St. John's to really see what this team can do moving forward. Same with Marquette. Two road games at St. John's, obviously tough game, and at Creighton, who's surging right now on a 7 game win streak, I believe it is. And they're playing some good basketball since the start of the new year. If Marquette wants to really contend and be a legit threat come March, they got to figure out how to win these games because it seems like they're almost in this spot the last 2 or 3 years, but they just couldn't get the job done when it comes down to March. 6 through 10, and it's a weird week here. You have Houston, Michigan State, and Iowa State all losing. So two of them, 2 out of the 3 stay the same. Iowa State loses 2 games last week, so they drop to 8. But Purdue moves up 1, and Texas A&M moves up 2 with 2 wins in SEC play. They get Missouri on the road. Like I said, that's going to be a big game for both these teams to really separate themselves in SEC play. Purdue, a win against Indiana, it looked kind of shaky there, but they took over late. Especially Braden Smith had a great game, career game, and a huge rivalry game on Friday night. Iowa State, shocking week this week for sure. The Arizona game, I think some people saw coming, but the Kansas State one, that's a shock to me. Losing by 19 at home, it's not looking good. And kind of in the same boat as Kansas. If they lose at Kansas, 3 straight losses, I think this Iowa State team and a lot of people are going to hop off that bandwagon here as we get to the later stages of the year. Michigan State, Houston, both suffered some tough losses, especially Houston. The 1 point overtime loss to Texas Tech is brutal, but I think they'll respond well. Get to 19-4, 11-1 in the conference this week with some weaker opponents in the Big 12. And then Michigan State, at UCLA, Oregon, I think it could be a trip up, but I think they already had their trip up game against USC. Now, UCLA, they'll probably come out, destroy them. Oregon at home, they're really fading. Expect that to be a win as well. So I expect Michigan State to get to 20 wins this week. 1 through 5 shouldn't be a shock to anybody. Auburn, Duke, Bama should be your top three. And then I think after that, you can really debate who should be where. And I'm putting Tennessee ahead of Florida, obviously, because Tennessee beat Florida, so they got to be ahead of them. It was a little shocking. They lost at home to Kentucky by 5. I think that was just a great game, just couldn't pull it out in the end. Then you beat Florida by 20, and I don't think anyone saw that coming by 20, maybe by 5, 6. But 20 points is a lot of points against a very good Florida team this year. But Florida has been kind of a casualty to the big schedule of the SEC. Same with Tennessee as well. There's only been really 2 teams dominant in SEC play, and that's Alabama and Auburn. That's why respectively they're 1 and 3. Duke right there in the middle at 2. I think their 2 toughest tests this week so far in ACC play at Syracuse, at Clemson. Obviously, they played North Carolina and just blew them out of the water. It wasn't even really a rivalry game. Didn't feel like it from start to finish. And hopping back on Auburn, if they can get that win at home against Florida, and Florida another SEC loss, it's pretty much going to be Auburn and Alabama for the sole champion of the SEC in the regular season. But that's going to be it for my Week 14 Top 25. Check back next week to see if your team made the cut. But until the next time, the Bench Buddies are out.